everyone, welcome to Switchblade Sisters Social Club, the true crime podcast where two friends exploit their worst fears for your entertainment.
You're welcome.
I'm Dee, a writer and podcaster.
And I'm Isla from Criminally Good Books, a true crime and crime fiction bookshop in York.
Follow us on all the socials.
Except for X, obviously.
Or have a look at our website, switchbladesisterssocialclub.com.
Check them out for all our latest episodes, events, deals, and other weird stuff.
Listeners' discretion advised. We're back with another Dee-Brief where we take a season break, but I don't actually take a break because I can't be left alone with my own thoughts. So today we're talking about one of the most famous voices in history, a man who sold over 150 million records. He won an Oscar, he created the Rat Pack, and he became one of the biggest celebrities the world had ever seen. But behind the tuxedos and the sold-out concerts and the dreamy blue eyes was another story, one involving FBI surveillance, organized crime, secret meetings, politicians, Las Vegas casinos. The question isn't, did Frank Sinatra know gangsters? He absolutely did. The question is, was he himself a criminal? Before we start, an important disclaimer. Frank Sinatra was never convicted of any organized crime offense. Many of the stories we're going to discuss come from FBI surveillance files, government investigations, biographies, and historical reporting. Some are well documented, others remain allegations, and some have become part of Hollywood mythology. So today, we're going to try to separate fact from rumor from legend. So let's go back to the beginning. Frank Sinatra was born in 1915 in Hoboken, New Jersey. It wasn't the glamorous New York you see in old films. It was rough, it was working class, it was full of dock workers and organized crime. Growing up, those worlds often overlapped and you could hardly avoid them. Frank's father was a boxer and a firefighter. His mother, Natalie Dolly Sinatra, was arguably the bigger personality. She was politically connected. She was well known in the local Democratic Party. She was opinionated, she was fearless, and remarkably influential within Hoboken. From an early age, Frank learned that relationships mattered. Who you knew could be every bit as important as what you knew. There was no grand musical education for Frank either, no expensive conservatoire. Frank simply loved singing. He was inspired by Bing Crosby and the likes, and he began performing in local clubs, then dance halls, then radio. He had something impossible to teach. Timing, emotion, that effortless way of making every song sound as though he'd lived every word. By the early 1940s, America had fallen in love with him. Interesting little aside though, Frank only has been attributed of co-writing 7 songs. Now, there's something that many people don't know, and that's that Frank Sinatra has a mugshot. And no, it wasn't involving anything to do with the Mafia. In 1938, 23-year-old Frank was arrested. The charge? Seduction, which sounds more like the title of one of his songs than a criminal offense. But at the time, New Jersey law made it an offense for a man to persuade an unmarried woman of good character to have sex through false promises of marriage. Although it makes a pleasant change from blaming the woman, it still feels incredibly sexist to me. The complaint alleged exactly that. There was just one problem though. The woman involved was already married. So once that became clear and obvious, the seduction charge collapsed and it was replaced with adultery. I know that this is not a nice act to cheat on your partner, but to make it a criminal act that you then have to spend public funding on charging, convicting, and so forth is insanity to me. The charge didn't survive either. The case was dropped. But the address produced something that would follow Sinatra for the rest of his life, the police mugshot and his naughty reputation. As Sinatra's career began to grow, he found himself performing in clubs across New Jersey and New York. But here's the problem. Many of those clubs were controlled by organized crime. If you were an entertainer in America during the 30s and 40s, working alongside the Mafia wasn't necessarily a choice. It was just how the entertainment industry operated. They owned the clubs, they owned the casinos, the booking agencies, the unions. Avoiding them completely would be almost impossible. So that alone doesn't make Sinatra unusual. Thousands of performers worked the same venues, but Sinatra appeared to do more than simply perform. According to later FBI files, he socialized with mobsters, accepted invitations, attended parties, shared meals, built genuine friendships. Whether these friendships crossed into criminality is another question entirely. So one name appears in his files over and over and over again, and that name is Willie Moretti. Moretti wasn't merely suspected of organized crime, he was a senior figure within what would later become known as the Genovese crime family. He was powerful, he was feared, and he was very well connected. He also happened to be one of Frank Sinatra's closest friends. The relationship wasn't hidden. The two were photographed together, seen together, socialized together. According to multiple accounts, Moretti even became the godfather to one of Sinatra's children. That's an unusually close relationship. However you chose to interpret it, the FBI certainly noticed it. Now we arrive at perhaps the most famous Sinatra myth of them all. It's been told in books, films, documentaries. It even inspired a scene in The Godfather, and it goes something like this. Frank Sinatra was desperate to leave band leader Tommy Dorsey. His contract prevented him from going solo. Then, according to the rumor, Willie Moretti paid Dorsey a visit, or perhaps held a gun to his head, depending on which version you hear. Shortly afterwards, Sinatra was free. Problem solved. So he didn't kill him, he just convinced him to give up the 43% claim in Frank's lifetime earnings. Actually, Dorsey died peacefully in his sleep from an overdose on the 26th of November, 1956. Willie Moretti, on the other hand, was gunned down by unidentified mob associates in a New Jersey restaurant in October 1951. But this intimidation, it's a fantastic story, it's cinematic, it's dramatic. There's just one issue. Nobody has ever proved it happened. The FBI investigated the allegation. I'm sure they found it very strange that this man would just give up so much potential money. They found no evidence, though. Biographers remain deeply divided. Some believe the story is complete fiction. Others think that it may contain a grain of truth, but maybe perhaps got exaggerated over time. Even Tommy Dorsey's own comments about the contract have been interpreted in wildly different ways. The honest answer is we simply don't know. So if you've seen The Godfather, you probably remember the scene where the Hollywood producer wakes up beside a horse's head. Many film historians believe that that entire subplot was inspired by this long-standing Sinatra rumor, even though Mario Puzo always denied writing Sinatra directly into his novel. By the early 1940s, Frank Sinatra wasn't simply a singer, he was becoming a phenomenon. And if you think that's an exaggeration, just think we still know who he is, however many years later, 80 years later. And wherever he went, the FBI seemed to follow. Agents began compiling information, who he met, where he traveled, who attended his parties, who flew on his private aircraft, who sat at his dinner table. Over the decades, that file would eventually grow to more than 2,300 pages. It's important to stress something here, though. Being investigated isn't the same as being found guilty. The FBI opened files on thousands of celebrities during the 20th century, especially those with political influence or connections to organized crime figures, of whom there were a lot. As I said, they controlled the entertainment industry. The existence of a file proves interest, not criminality. So don't sue me. But one thing becomes obvious when reading summaries of these documents. The Bureau became increasingly concerned by the company that Sinatra was keeping, not because they believed every meeting was criminal, but because the same names kept appearing again and again and again. And by the 1950s, Frank Sinatra wasn't just America's biggest entertainment. He was becoming Mr. Las Vegas. The city and Sinatra became almost inseparable. Bright lights, showgirls, champagne, the Rat Pack, and audiences willing to pay anything to see him perform. But there's another reason Vegas suited Sinatra. Almost every major casino had organized crime somewhere in the background. the Sands, the Flamingo, the Riviera, the Tropicana. Many were funded, influenced, or controlled by mafia families. That wasn't a conspiracy theory. It was later proven through countless investigations into organized crime. So if you performed in Las Vegas during the 1950s, you were inevitably working alongside people with underworld connections. The question was, how close were those relationships? Around this time, Sinatra became the unofficial leader of the Rat Pack. That was Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, Joey Bishop. 5 friends who turned drinking, gambling, and performing into an art form. They made everything look effortless. Their jokes felt improvised. Their parties were legendary. They were just so cool. But behind the glamour, the FBI noticed something. Many of the people attending those parties weren't just celebrities. They included bookmakers, casino owners, union officials, politicians, and men with very colorful criminal records. Again, being in the same room as someone isn't a crime, but the Bureau believed Sinatra repeatedly chose to spend time with figures they regarded as major organized crime bosses. But there's one episode that genuinely caused Sinatra problems. It's this one, the Cal-Neva Lodge. That's California-Nevada border, i.e., California where you can't gamble and Nevada where you can gamble. Sinatra became part owner of a glamorous casino resort on the shores of Lake Tahoe. It looked like a dream investment. Hollywood stars visited, politicians stayed there, it was luxurious. But investors believed organized crime figures were using the hotel too. According to the government investigations, known mafia associates stayed at the resort. Some reportedly used Sinatra's private suite. Eventually, the Nevada Gaming Control Board had had enough, and in 1963, Sinatra's casino license was revoked. Not because he'd been convicted of organized crime, but because authorities concluded he'd allowed known mob figures access to the property. It was one of the very few occasions where his friendships carried real professional consequences. But then things became even more politically explosive. Frank Sinatra became close friends with John F. Kennedy. This wasn't just a celebrity friendship. Sinatra actively campaigned for JFK during the 1960 presidential election. He hosted fundraising events. He used his celebrity to attract supporters and became one of Kennedy's most valuable Hollywood allies. The FBI was watching all of this very closely because Sinatra's social circle and Kennedy's political circle were beginning to overlap. And again, one name kept coming up. Sam Giancana, the notorious Chicago Mafia boss. For decades, rumors have suggested Sinatra acted as a bridge between Kennedy's supporters and organized crime figures. Some writers have even argued that the Mafia helped deliver key votes for Kennedy. Others completely reject the idea. To this day, no conclusive evidence has ever proved Sinatra secretly negotiated between the two, but the rumors have never disappeared. Ironically, after Kennedy became president, the friendship cooled dramatically. Attorney General Robert Kennedy launched an aggressive campaign against organized crime, and suddenly, being photographed with Sinatra no longer looked politically helpful. The White House quietly distanced itself, and Sinatra reportedly took it personally. Very personally. You would. Imagine helping someone get elected, only to discover they've stopped returning your calls because you're a PR disaster. Ouch. Just when Sinatra thought life couldn't get any stranger, though, it did. Because on the 8th of December, 1963, his 19-year-old son, Frank Sinatra Jr., was kidnapped. Armed men burst into his hotel room near Lake Tahoe, abducted him, and demanded ransom. For perhaps the first time in his life, Frank Sinatra couldn't rely on charm, connections, or influence. He was simply a terrified father. He paid the ransom, and the kidnappers released Frank Jr., and were later arrested. It's still one of the most famous celebrity kidnappings in American history. The case also produced one of Sinatra's strangest lifelong habits. During ransom negotiations, he'd struggled to find enough coins to use a public payphone. Afterwards, he reportedly carried 10 dimes in his pocket for the rest of his life, just in case he ever needed to make another emergency call. It's a tiny detail, but somehow one of the saddest and most human. Over almost 40 years, the FBI continued adding to Sinatra's file, and by the time surveillance ended, it was thousands of pages long. Agents documented meetings, phone calls, travel, dinner guests, political contacts, casino owners, etc., etc. Here's the interesting part, though. Despite decades of scrutiny, the FBI never produced evidence enough to charge Frank Sinatra with organized crime offenses. Not once. No racketeering indictment, no conspiracy prosecutions, no trial, nothing. That doesn't mean every rumor was false, nor does it mean that every allegation was true. It simply means something important. Suspicion isn't evidence, association isn't guilt, and history becomes so much more complicated when the two are confused. So, was Frank Sinatra connected to the mob? Yes. Socially, undeniably. Photographs exist, meetings happened, friendships were real. Government agencies documented many of these. Was he a mafia member, though? There's no evidence of that. Did he personally commit any organized crime offenses? None were ever proven. Did he sometimes exercise astonishingly poor judgment about the company he kept? That's probably the safest conclusion. Perhaps Sinatra himself summed it up best. He reportedly hated journalists suggesting his success depended on organized crime. He insisted his career was built on talent, hard work, and determination. Looking at his extraordinary career, it's difficult to argue with that. Looking at some of his friendships, it's equally difficult not to ask questions. Frank Sinatra remains one of the most fascinating figures of the 20th century. I'm Dee, and this has been another Dee-Brief. If you've enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to follow Switchblade Sisters Social Club wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a review, and we will be back in a few weeks with Season 7. Bye, bye. Love you, bye.
Like this episode? Want more? Come visit me, Isla, at Criminally Good Books in the heart of York. We're an independent bookshop dedicated entirely to crime. From cosy mysteries to gritty thrillers, historical whodunits to juicy true crime. We've got signed editions, special gifts, and plenty of recommendations for your next obsession. We also host a bunch of awesome author events. Can't make it in person? Visit us online at criminallygoodbooks.co.uk.